Hey Angie, I'm opening my envelope. Okay, cover sheet. Interpreting at the mental health clinic. Freelance interpreter just accepted an ongoing assignment interpreting for a newly established outpatient mental health clinic. The situation includes one-to-one counseling sessions, small group sessions of no more than a dozen participants, and occasional large group sessions with an invited speaker. They're going to be conducted by a therapist who cannot sign. Okay, so the therapist asked how you became interested in sign language, and then asked about residential experience of deaf people and about an article that he read which claimed there's a high level of sexual abuse of students in residential schools for the deaf. What would you do? I would probably tell them that there has been known to have sexual abuse in residential schools, and that doesn't necessarily mean that every school is like that and that every person at the schools is going to have those kind of issues going on. I would probably not really go too in depth with anything and just kind of be like, oh yeah, I've heard that too, not really elaborate a lot on it, just because, I don't know, I don't really want to spread like a negative connotation or like stereotype of the residential schools. And yeah, so I probably just like briefly be like, oh yeah, I've heard that too, but it's not something that everyone deals with or whatever. Setting 2. After you respond, the therapist tells you that the reason he asked is the deaf patient in the session has a history of child sexual abuse and that this is the first in a series of court-ordered therapy sessions. The deaf person finally arrives, and it's someone you recognize from the interpreter you've done in the community. The therapist directs the deaf person to his office, and the session begins. At the end of the hour, you accompany the deaf person to the receptionist desk to schedule the next appointment. In the middle of trying to find a workable time, the therapist approaches and in front of the deaf person asks if he can speak to you in private for a few minutes. What would you do? Why? In that situation, I would tell the therapist that I can't, that I'm only there to help, to interpret for the deaf person, and in this case, I would say, well, if it's about the deaf person, then let me bring my client with, or whatever, or else I would just say, I'm sorry, I can't, I'm not allowed to talk about these situations or about my clients outside of the work setting. Number 3. A few weeks later, the deaf person is scheduled to join an ongoing group therapy session you have been asked to interpret. You have been told the group consists of therapists plus approximately 12 men who are undergoing court-ordered treatments for sexual abuse of children. The group has been in session for a few minutes, and it's common for new people to join the group as others leave. You have arranged for a colleague to interpret with you since you suspect this one will be more demanding than the one-on-one counseling. 30 minutes before the session is to begin, you receive a page from your colleague saying that she has been involved in a car accident. She suffered only minor injuries but has been taken to the hospital for x-rays. She will be unable to interpret the group counseling session. She has placed a call through the referral agency, but they have not been able to locate a replacement. You two contact the agency to confirm and that they have no one available on such short notice. I guess in that situation, I would just maybe explain to my client that I can't, or that there was supposed to be another interpreter there, that we were teaming, but they weren't able to make it. And then just try my best to interpret the whole thing, and maybe if I have to do more of like a consecutive type interpreting where I could take down notes and make sure I'm getting the right information from the right people. And then maybe, I don't know, keep trying to call the agency to see if they can get someone else, or and try to figure out a way to get someone else there, but in the meantime, just do it myself and try to keep up as best as I can. Number 4, decide that you really have no other viable option than to explain the situation to the therapist and let him determine whether or not to proceed under the circumstances. He tells you that this is a critical juncture in the deaf person's therapeutic program and insists that the session go on as scheduled. During the session, you struggle a few times, particularly at some of the graphic fantasies described by a couple of the members of the group. Nevertheless, you leave the session feeling that, under the circumstances, the deaf person was not disadvantaged, and apart from your own uneasiness at working at the session alone, you feel that the session was generally quite successful. However, you begin to realize that this ongoing assignment is beginning to affect you emotionally. You are definitely not looking forward to the group session next week, especially after the graphic descriptions you interpreted this week. What would you do? I was actually thinking about this kind of the last one. If it's a whole session of all men who were they're discussing their like sexual abuse that they've had in the past, I would feel like, as a woman, I would feel out of place, and that's not really the type of situation I belong in. And especially this one's saying like the graphic descriptions and stuff, and I feel like at this point I would probably call the agency and tell them, I'm not comfortable interpreting for a group of men who have all had problems with sexual abuse in the past, and try to get someone else to take over for the rest of the time, just because I wouldn't feel safe necessarily being in a situation with all of those men. And then the type of things they're talking about, it's just kind of an awkward situation for me to be in as a female in this setting. A few days later, a friend of yours asked to interpret for a Cub Scout Den meeting. Your friend's deaf son and another deaf boy belong to the Cub Scout Den based at the local school they attend. However, they want you to attend upcoming regional scouting camp Pori Scouting Olympics take place over an upcoming long weekend holiday weekend. You've asked to interpret the organizational meeting, and because it's for your friend, you agreed to do so on pro bono basis. When you arrive, there are approximately 50 Cub Scouts and their parents, mostly fathers, at the meeting. You're waiting for your friend and his son to arrive. You notice one of the men looks familiar. After a short time, you realize that he's one of the men from the group counseling session. You remember him quite clearly because of his graphic descriptions of his sexual fantasies, almost all of which involved young boys. What do you do? Why? That's really hard because I know technically, we're not supposed to say anything because we're not allowed to tell people about what we interpret and who we interpret for.